Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled Protect the Hype, Backup Best Practices for Converged and Hyperconverged Infrastructure. I'm Kevin Collins from Unitrends, and I'm here with Joe Noonan, Vice President of Product Marketing, and he'll be taking us through today's presentation. And don't forget, one lucky attendee will be walking away with a $100 Amazon gift card. We'll contact the winner via email after the webinar. But before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded, and after the event, you'll receive an email with a link to the on-demand version of the webinar. I would also encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can do so by typing them into the Q&A box on the bottom right of the player, and we'll answer your questions at the end of the session. At this point, I'll turn it over to Joe. Enjoy the presentation, and Joe, take it away.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Hopefully I sound okay. Appreciate the introduction. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. So we're here to talk about, obviously, hyperconverged and converged systems. Really, I think in the analyst world and the market segmentation world, you'll hear this be called integrated systems very often. I know Gartner tends to refer to it that way. So it's not just the hyperconverged piece, but we're going to be looking at kind of that whole gambit. And yeah, I like to start off a lot of my webinars just thinking a little bit about this less is more concept. We talk about, the less is more world because ultimately it can really suck to be an IT admin sometimes. I feel for everyone on the phone listening that has that role. Those that might be partners selling to folks in IT understand this as well, but you obviously get less money to do things, less time to do things. Everyone expects everything to kind of work perfectly. And of course, no one ever wants any kind of downtime or data loss. And that's one of the struggles that I think folks deal with today that are on the phone. But our topic today really goes well with that less is more theme because what we're talking about here is hyperconvergence and the convergence of infrastructure as well as how that can impact backup. So let's take a look at this whole era very quickly. There's some cool things happening for sure, obviously, around here, and things are changing very, very quickly. So if we take a look at this shift on the left-hand side, really where this all started was trying to reduce footprint, not really doing much integration around compute and storage and networking and things like that, but really just trying to make the chassis smaller, putting blades into a smaller form factor, racking things differently, ultimately trying to save on data center space. And obviously that's evolved to integrating the compute, the storage, the networking, and now into, we start getting fancier with words, where you start talking about multi-node, scale-out file systems, where everything is interconnected with fabric and all that kind of stuff. And in the end, lots of great words and all that, but what ultimately this did for us was it gave us huge benefits in rapid time to deployment and time to value. And if you think about what else it did, I give you a hint on what these numbers mean, but you can't really answer it here anyway, so I'll just tell you. So this really has to do with a tremendous cost savings around footprint. So what you see here is a range, and I'm sure everybody kind of can find different numbers here. But when we look at various data centers, there's a range for one rack U of space in a data center. It can range from over $1,100 to over $2,200. So as things become converged, as things converged in the infrastructure, you start seeing pretty big savings, on your CapEx and on your OpEx, especially in a data center. Now, when we start looking at the future, this is from Gartner at this point, and I always say like, and then maybe, because we'll see how things go. But obviously today you're seeing a lot more around software-defined systems, and lots of buzzwords up here. So aggregated fabric-based resource pools, hybrid IT cloud pooling. What does this mean ultimately? Ultimately, this is just saying that things are getting more flexible. You're less tied to the hardware, like you really were in that earlier stage of the era. You're less tied to the hardware, and you're more dynamic across premises and across clouds. And that's really where things are going here when it comes to the infrastructure. Now, within the whole integrated system space that we're discussing here, you can see that it's growing pretty well compared to traditional infrastructures for servers and storage. If you look at those spaces, 18.7%, that's pretty nice. But the hyperconverged systems are really on a tear, right? And that's something that's pretty obvious here. It goes to show that if you've adopted one of these, or you're definitely not alone. You're in a place that obviously people are going, and if you're a partner selling them, or if you're someone who's thinking about adopting hyperconverged infrastructure, you're kind of going in a pretty good direction here, given where the market's saying the growth really is. And I think Nutanix is a great example of a winner here in that space. Their growth has earned them great success in their recent IPO, and they're the market share leader in the hyperconverged system space. So obviously some pretty good numbers there with good growth and a great valuation. So somebody to take note of, obviously, in that space. But they're not the only player, for sure. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those players. But right now, as we look at that era in the space, and naturally, it's saving people time to market, time to value. It's saving you on deployment time. It's saving you on infrastructure costs. It's making things more nimble and flexible. It's got to be all perfect then, right? I mean, there's got to be no issues around this whatsoever that people are dealing with. And obviously, that's a lead-in. You all know the answer's no there, right? So what's happening here is IT decision-making can actually become very complex with such a fast-evolving market, right? This all started in 2009, and look at where we are today. It started with converged systems where form factors, now just from that initial day where you had blades and things like that, form factors are changing rapidly amongst the converged system vendors. You're seeing more fit-for-purpose solutions, right, such as HP's Apollo for high-performance computing. So you're now faced with decisions about whether or not I'm going to plop in something that's specific for a particular type of application or business service, or do I try to standardize? So that's more decision-making for you. Then, of course, you have, the full hyper-converged platforms like Nutanix and SimpliVity, not to mention that, most environments are still mixed with different types of infrastructure. This is not ultimately making a lot of your workload and decision-making very simple. A lot of benefits that these bring, but it's a lot to keep up with. And if you don't implement it right, you could find yourself kind of implementing a lot of point solutions, which could go kind of haywire for you. So if I pause for a second, talk a little bit about the key players in this space, just for context. This is not a presentation about one vendor versus another. I know that I mentioned Nutanix, but, I'm not selling Nutanix. We support all folks here in this space and want to talk about many of these folks. But Nutanix is obviously one of the big ones right now in terms of the hyper-converged space. They're very hot. There's a lot of hype around them. You're hearing a lot more, especially because of the IPO. Now, Cisco obviously is a big player here with UCS. And UCS is really more of a converged platform. It supports physical and virtual operating systems, whereas Nutanix and SimpliVity, for instance, they support virtualization only. And with UCS, obviously, you're not really converging everything about the storage in there. It's more about the compute and the networking piece of things, and a lot of folks are still using SANs. But Cisco has moved into the hyperconverged space with HyperFlex, which is obviously pulling things in and converging them even further. EMC has a number of solutions here, starting with vBlock all the way down to VxRail. This kind of starts more on the converged space and gets to hyperconverged. And there's a lot of components here with VMware and even Cisco in some of these particular offerings that EMC's kind of pulled together under their name, which obviously now is related to Dell. And then there's SimpliVity. SimpliVity is also virtual only, like Nutanix, as I mentioned before, hyperconverged all the way. So these are obviously really good. Between Nutanix and SimpliVity, they're the ones that are kind of solely in that hyperconverged space that are, I would not say startup by any means, but they kind of grew directly into the hyperconverged space, whereas Cisco and EMC have sort of evolved there from converged to hyperconverged. Now, what's funny is that you got a lot of good players out there, a lot of great benefits. We talked about how that creates complexity with such fast evolving change, but there's even more decisions now that you have to think through related to backup and DR options. And that's because a lot of these folks are coming out with native tools. I'll specifically call out Nutanix and SimpliVity here because I think Cisco and EMC, as you start to leverage anything there, I wouldn't call it native. Really, you're just leveraging kind of VMware-specific tools if you want to call anything native there. But with Nutanix and SimpliVity, you're seeing a sort of a change here where these guys will embed VM-level snapshots, and we'll call that backup and say this is a form of protection and kind of pushing folks to leverage those snapshots as a sort of initial point of protection for your systems. And obviously all the data remains there within the hyperconverged infrastructure, and it's all managed within the hyperconverged platforms interface. And of course, that data, those snapshots can be replicated to secondary sites. So you need another Nutanix or SimpliVity box at that secondary site, and you can have the data over there for DR purposes and for compliance purposes to get things off-site. Some are starting to even embed capabilities to integrate with AWS and Azure, where you might be able to take those snapshots and copy the data out to your other cloud storage. Again, more just for compliance at that point. You're not really seeing a whole lot necessarily built in for DR yet in those particular areas, but things are moving in that direction. And what's not widely available now, I think SimpliVity does a pretty good job of some of this. I don't know that Nutanix has got as much capability here, but you're starting to see more DR automation around that. So if you can do the local snapshots and replicate that, you can actually start automating some of the DR capabilities. But I wouldn't say that that's widely available at this point in time. Now, one thing that I think is pretty interesting here is that when you look at the vendors that I mentioned before, SimpliVity is probably the only one that takes to market a story that says you don't really need backup. Use our stuff, it's the best, it's the only thing you ever need, remove complexity, don't use backup. I've heard that from several times from folks around there, and I know it's a big part of their pitch. Nutanix, who has a lot of these capabilities built in as well, they understand that backup vendors are still very important, and ultimately these are important partnerships for them. For instance, Nutanix is actually building APIs out for their own Acropolis hypervisor so that backup vendors can integrate more cleanly and perform backups more seamlessly within that environment, right? So that big question of whether or not you need backup, I think it's an important one. You know that I'm leading you since Unitrends is a backup provider, but it's another question that I think IT folks have to consider when they start looking at converged and hyperconverged infrastructure because of these native tools. I think the native tools provide value and benefit, but I think Nutanix is a good example of showing how important partners in this backup and DR space still are, even though there's some built-in capabilities. Because I think ultimately, most people I speak with, they really do want fewer vendors, more complete solutions that take less time to manage, and overall something that they ultimately can trust will work. Right? And if you get all that, you're ahead of the game and you can probably relax a little bit. But adding more vendors to the whole data protection picture can be pretty complex. And I think there's a few key reasons why needing backup is very important here. And when we talk about backup, again, we're talking about backup and continuity, I should be saying, because we all know that it goes well beyond just basic backup. So if we kind of dig into some of these reasons, there's a slew of them, obviously, of why a modern all-in-one enterprise backup and continuity strategy is key. And just very quickly, right, the simplification around mixed environments, capabilities around local and cloud continuity, so around backing up certain things as well as being able to recover some of those capabilities, still not there yet with native tools. Separating data between your production data and your backup data. Native tools are typically keeping the data, at least your initial backups, right there within the infrastructure. And for them to be efficient, you can be pretty worried that a little bit of data loss in certain areas can obviously impact your backup data as well. And then, of course, retention and compliance. So I'll talk a little bit about these, not for too long, because I think a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory and they make a lot of good sense. But, a big part of this is that you rarely get folks that have standardized just on these modernized integrated systems. And some of them only support virtualization, right? So you're not even, if we know that physical systems exist all over the place at this point. Still, we know that virtualization is huge in terms of workload shifts, but physical systems still account for a big part of the market in terms of server sales. So they exist in environments, and obviously if you have physical and virtual environments, if you're running something like Nutanix and SimpliVity, that means you're running something else too. And really an all-in-one vendor can drastically simplify your overall strategy rather than just facilitating a point strategy specific to that hyperconverged infrastructure. This is probably one of the most key reasons I see people wanting to make sure that they're leveraging kind of that all-in-one approach across everything versus just something specific within hyperconverged infrastructures. And they a lot of times they'll ignore the native tools of the hyperconverged vendors. Even though some of them can be pretty cool, they'll ignore them because they ultimately don't want to learn something different that when they have a full continuity strategy built around the entire infrastructure. Now, robust local and cloud continuity. So I think, when you look at some of the native tool capabilities, which revolve a lot around snapshots, I think that snapshots have gotten a little bit smarter in the hyperconverged space. They've got more granular for sure. You're not dealing typically with LUNs. You're dealing with, VM or even virtual disk level capabilities, and that's great. That's awesome. Some of them are even building in the ability to recover, files and folders here and there. I wouldn't say that things are robust in that sense where you're getting, global indexing and application-specific capabilities. And of course, in a lot of these platforms, you're not getting physical plus virtual. You're getting just the virtual component of it. So, trying to recover emails, databases, transaction logs, things like that, you typically are going to be missing some capabilities if you're leveraging just the native tools. And besides from that, you've probably been hearing a lot about Unitrends and others in the industry providing advanced recovery assurance capabilities. And when we talk about recovery assurance, you're talking about automated backup verification, automated recovery verification, DR testing that's completely automated, that doesn't impact production, being able to serve up compliance reports around your entire DR strategy. Those are advancements that you're not seeing yet in a lot of the hyperconverged native tools either. And that really goes to a broader strategy. And again, why I think an all-in-one vendor tends to be the winner here pretty clearly when you're still trying to, bring hyperconverged infrastructure into your environment, but you naturally need to protect it all. Now also think about cloud options. We mentioned before, some are starting to integrate a little bit with AWS and Azure. That's pretty good. Hyperscale cloud providers are pretty cool. Now, however, the functionality can be limited for true DR scenarios, and hyperscale clouds like AWS and Azure are great. Again, Unitrends supports those too, but they can end up being more costly if the architecture for using the cloud isn't necessarily done right. And I'm not saying folks are necessarily doing it wrong, but you're probably going to see that things are a little nascent in terms of full DR and also compliance when it comes to cloud and native solutions built within hyperconverged platforms. Whereas you might be able to get something much more broad from either a backup vendor that integrates more deeply with those hyperscale clouds, or backup vendors, and you probably have seen a lot of these, where they'll have their own purpose-built proprietary cloud that has all the capabilities specific to the needs of DR for your data, DR for your applications, and full spin-up, and even puts SLAs around that. Those are important things that you get from those kind of purpose-built continuity clouds. Unitrends has one of those. There's other vendors in the space, obviously, as well. So broader cloud options, I think, are another big piece of this when it comes to thinking about your overall continuity strategy as it pertains to hyperconvergence. Backup data separation, I think, is a pretty easy one. The next two, I think, are both pretty easy. A lot of folks that I speak with, to have your only level of protection be snapshots that live within your production environment. It's number one, it's a costly way to leverage that storage, and also basically any kind of reasonably sized storage failure that isn't environment-wide can force unnecessary data loss at your backup level as well. And if you have some systems that need to get recovered pretty quickly, and that production and the snapshot information happens to be impacted, you can't go to that secondary storage to do recoveries, which means you typically have to start looking at a DR process for recovery if you have that in place. And that's costly. It's a little bit more painful than being able to use something like a Unitrends instant recovery capability from our backup appliance to spin things up back locally if you did have, a node outage or something like that. And then cost-effective retention. I mentioned before, I alluded to it. So if you're leveraging your backup, if you're leveraging your production storage for decent amounts of retention for backups, that can get pretty costly, right? That's expensive infrastructure, and there's a typical reason why a lot of folks would want something that's tiered, a little bit less expensive, less costly media, get a lot of that information off premise. Again, it's pretty good scenarios, I think, with having maybe short-term retention in there and not using a lot of extra space in the production environment for that short-term snapshot allocation. But you start thinking about long-term compliance and things like that, it can be much more costly if you start just leveraging the native tools built in with those platforms. And a couple of real-world examples. So these are customers of Unitrends. and there's a lot more examples if you go to our website and check out our case studies or talk to some of our sales reps, but Nashville Wire is one of them. They have 9 sites, and they had a mixed scenario of Nutanix for the virtual environment in their main data centers, and then they had robo sites with a lot of physical windows and workstations and things like that. So across those 9 sites, we actually deployed 9 recovery series backup appliances, which include the fully integrated software, storage, compute, everything, kind of similar to the hyperconverged message we have with the infrastructure. Those backup appliances deliver that as well. And one of the really nice benefits we've gotten here with Nashville Wire was that they went from, I think, and I might mess up the numbers here a little bit, but that 66% footprint reduction, they went from a huge number of cabinets down to about 8U of space when they implemented both Nutanix and Unitrends to remove their original part of their data center infrastructure and their original backup provider. And that was because Unitrends employs a lot of the same benefits we've been talking about here with hyperconvergence, in that we can bring together in these appliances the compute, the storage, the networking, the software, the security, the operating system. All of that is integrated there and proactively monitored by our support team to make sure that ultimately, if there is an issue, we're going to be able to help out very quickly, and you got one vendor across your entire backup and continuity strategy. And that's really what Nashville Wire was able to achieve. And they really valued in a big way the extra recovery capabilities that you get from Unitrends versus, the native tools. So they actually elected to not use any of the native tools within Nutanix at this point. They just use Unitrends for all protection. So if I were to look at, a visual of what that architecture looks like, it's kind of similar to this. I mean, this is not a reference architecture specifically for Nashville Wire, but it is just a nice visualization of kind of, Nutanix having hypervisor with virtual machines, and then you have that kind of external appliance that can tap into the hypervisor APIs, protect things efficiently within the Nutanix environment, but obviously keep the backup data outside of it, and then do really cool things with it from that point, right? Everything is globally deduplicated in line to give you good retention. You can replicate that data in backup copy format to another appliance off-site, to third-party clouds, which I'm not showing here for simplicity, but you could also take that out to the Unitrends Cloud. And there's obviously phenomenal long-term retention options within the Unitrends Cloud, as well as 1-hour guaranteed SLA spin-up of those machines for DR as a service. So that's a little bit of a visual for how that looks for those folks. Now, Sligro Food Group's another one. These folks have a pretty big Nutanix environment. They have about 70-plus nodes, leveraging VMware, but also have physical Windows and Linux. And they elected to go with Unitrends Enterprise Backup Software. Right, that's a virtual appliance that actually lives within the virtual environment and backs up to a NAS. But they actually do use Nutanix's built-in snapshot capabilities for short-term system recoveries. So they keep a very small amount of retention there, so they're not over-consuming their production storage. Probably a day or two is about it. And if they ever have a VM outage or something along those lines, they can quickly recover that from that snapshot. But they leverage Unitrends for any type of backup, still of those same virtual machines, but also the rest of the environment that's physical Windows and Linux. And they use that for compliance, retention, granular recovery capabilities that go beyond what you can get from the native tools. So kind of everything we talked about before. I think Sligro is a great example of someone who really kind of solved through, okay, native tools are great, there's some benefits, I'm going to use them, but it's not complete for me. And I need an all-in-one solution like Unitrends to kind of solve that problem around the entire infrastructure. So for them, it looked a little bit different. The only thing that's different here is that they have UEB, which is a virtual appliance that runs within the Nutanix environment, backs up to, I think, a Synology NAS is what they were using. And these guys have a couple 100 terabytes of backup data that they have basically one instance of UEB backing up to. So we have a pretty scalable product for that type of environment. But again, they are optionally using at the bottom there. You can see label number 4 and 5, the Nutanix snapshots. And that's actually something that's pretty cool that they're getting kind of the best of both worlds. So they've chosen to actually add a little bit of complexity by including the Nutanix component into their overall solution. But that was something that they were okay with because they felt that that would increase their service levels around recovery from those snapshots for machines, very, very quickly if it was something that was obviously very recent. But again, not a complete solution for the entire environment. So I think that's where, what I've been pitching here a little bit and setting the stage for is this idea of all-in-one enterprise backup and continuity and where it comes into play. I hate having to read slides because there's a lot of words here, but they're pretty important when you kind of think about where Unitrends stands, not just within the hyperconverged space, but in general. But I think it complements hyperconverged very, very well because a lot of this messaging is really similar. Right, so it should resonate with folks if you've already kind of taken that leap into the hyperconverged world. You've seen the benefits that you get from footprint. You've seen the benefits you get with deployment, time to value. This is the type of thing that you get with kind of an all-in-one solution around backup and continuity. Fewer vendors, less finger pointing. You know, obviously in the old world, when you're cobbling everything together from different vendors, you're doing a lot more work setting those up. You're constantly tuning those. We talked a lot about the limited continuity capabilities, and recovery assurance is another piece of that. Recovery assurance, if I didn't explain it very well before, really has to do with that automated recovery verification, automated DR testing for your full site, automated DR compliance reporting, things like that. Ultimately, it just means that we're proving that it'll work. And that's something that you typically aren't seeing with the native tools, as well as kind of the old world of backup and continuity. Then there's additional risks and threats around ransomware these days, right? Windows systems, when you look at a lot of backup vendors in the space, they are based on Windows. Folks are fighting Windows security and vulnerability issues all the time, right? They're already at risk of losing production data. They're also at risk of losing their backup data, given that a lot of backup vendors are based on Windows. And when you are bringing lots of components together, the way that most kind of backup vendors do, that can typically lead to fragmented and lower customer satisfaction, right? And Unitrends is on the opposite side. One vendor, one throat to choke, easy to configure and go, strong capabilities. We're purpose-built hardened Linux appliances, whether it's our physical appliance or our virtual appliance. You get better security and protection from ransomware as a result. And of course, high customer satisfaction and confidence. And a couple of visuals help kind of drive that home. You know, when you think about just your backup world and continuity world, that involves compute. It might involve virtualization in one of the layers. Then there's, of course, an OS, your backup software. All that on-premise component at the bottom there can ultimately be, in the old world, multiple products from multiple vendors. And then now, obviously, things are getting more complex because you're getting really cool options around cloud. But now there's cloud compute and some of the additional software that runs related to the cloud. Then there's cloud storage. We talked about recovery assurance. Is your cloud provider even offering that to give you basically any kind of guarantee that what you're doing from a continuity perspective in the cloud is going to work? All those things could be different products, different vendors when you're talking about some of the other competitors in this space. With Unitrends, it's the ruthless pursuit of simplicity like you see on the left. All the way on the right there, you see a backup appliance that converges everything on-premise with an integrated, purpose-built continuity cloud from Unitrends, all protected and managed from one single interface. And the beauty of it is that it's also one support call for everything. We've had a consistent 98% satisfaction rating for years now. And when you put a little bit of math to it, even if you get good customer sat from many of the vendors that you're building that stack on the left-hand side with, having to aggregate so many things at once will ultimately drive down that overall satisfaction rating for how you actually get support. One support call for everything, I think, is huge. That's a big benefit that you're getting from the hyperconverged world, and it's a big benefit you get from all-in-one backup and continuity. And a little bit about Unitrends Cloud. We talked, so I don't bash AWS and Azure. Again, we support them. From a capabilities perspective for off-site compliance and protecting cloud workloads as well, right? If you're running, people are starting to actually run production out there, that needs to be protected. A lot of times you want to centralize that with one vendor as well. We can do that, especially for Azure. But the limited capabilities around DR as a service, some of the changes around pricing, very, very limited to no recovery assurance whatsoever, and retention can ultimately be costly when you start leveraging a lot of third-party public clouds, and you don't really get many SLAs around it. And some of them will not let you necessarily seed. So if you have a big environment with a lot of data, you ultimately may not be able to get it out there very quickly within even a month or two, depending on your WAN bandwidth. In the new world and where we kind of see Unitrends playing, because we do have the Unitrends Cloud and that all-in-one capability for the on-premise component, plus the cloud being managed in one interface, We can do physical and virtual DR as a service. Obviously, that means less finger pointing. We talked about one support call. We can even perform the recovery assurance piece across physical and virtual. So that mixed environment piece is a big, big component of being able to get a consistent continuity strategy implemented across both physical and virtual. That's something that's very tough to do and you don't see from a lot of vendors. We have capabilities around infinite retention in our cloud. So if you have a 20 or 30 terabytes of data that you need long-term compliance for, we're not going to charge you for any of the retention. You pay a fee based on 20 or 30 terabytes of data, and we'll actually just manage the retention. You don't have to lift a finger. And naturally, if you need to go and grab a file or grab anything back from that for e-discovery or compliance purposes, it's all very simple to do. That gives you more confidence. I think a big differentiator is 1 hour recovery SLA. You know, leveraging AWS and Azure, you will definitely get very, very little guarantee in terms of how long things will take. That is a shared hyperscale cloud infrastructure. You don't know what else is going on in that environment. We have a purpose-built continuity cloud. Yes, it is, you know, shared for the sense of efficiency for us to keep costs down. But the one thing we're doing for people is giving them a DR option so that we can spin up their environment, and we give a 1 hour SLA that says we'll guarantee that that will happen. And we'll give you reports on a monthly basis that show that we can keep that as a part of our service. And of course, you know, bulk seating going both ways, that's a big part of the offering for folks that obviously have, you know, a lot of data and can't necessarily ship it all over the WAN the first time, and they just want to get incrementals over the WAN, and that's it. But coming back is important too, right? In a DR scenario, if you lose your backup appliance or your backups for some reason, we can ship your backup data back to you. If you lose an entire site, when the failback time comes, we can get the data back to you without necessarily having to wait for it over the wire. So just kind of rounding things out around Hyperconverged, some of the unique integration we do have that I didn't necessarily call attention to yet, and just want to make sure people understand. So from a Cisco UCS perspective, we actually do some special things there where we integrate with the UCS manager service profiles, and we can protect those. So that's a big part of the configuration of that overall converged infrastructure. We can granularly recover specific items from those profiles. If something were to change or be deleted or misconfigured, and you want to go back to an earlier point, we can do that. So it's just like any type of data where it could be deleted. Having that capability to just have it be a part of your backup schedule, it's sitting there. It doesn't consume a lot of space, obviously, but even if it did, it's all globally deduped. And the best part about it is, you know, if you don't necessarily control everybody going in and touching those things, and people aren't manually going off and exporting information and doing their own manual backups with the native tools from Cisco before they make changes, you can find yourselves spending a lot of time fixing things. And this is really about, you know, obviously reducing that time and stress and just knowing that you're covered. And we're one of the, I think we are the only vendor that has this integration directly into the user interface. It's just a point-and-click setup, just like any other type of application. We do, from a Nutanix perspective, support all hypervisors that they support, including Acropolis we can protect. Today, we actually protect Acropolis with agents because it's KVM-based, but we are in the process of doing deeper integration at the hypervisor level. But for VMware, Hyper-V, and Citrix Zen Server, Unitrends also has deep integration at the hypervisor level, and those are all supported platforms for Nutanix. And we're in the process right now of becoming Nutanix ready. So I think those are things that are good to call out for folks that, you know, are looking at Nutanix and Cisco specifically, that there are some special messages there. But again, all the benefits of what we do with hypervisors, virtualization, physical machines, recovery assurance, cloud, all that kind of stuff, and benefits across, you know, the full gambit of EMC and HP and SimpliVity and the other folks that are out there as well in this space. So the quick wrap up, recovery series physical appliances, that gives you the full all-in-one capabilities, but then again, some folks like to use their own hardware, so we can converge as much as we can from the software layer up, but we still deliver virtual appliances that are locked down, they're Linux-based, they're secure against malware and ransomware. So we're still doing you one better from the simplicity perspective than just making you kind of pull all the operating system and backup software and security things all together yourself. And recently I've announced a service to protect Office 365 backup. It's fully managed. You don't touch anything related to protection. It just happens. but you get a nice self-service recovery user interface to be able to recover any type of granular item for exchange online, whether that's emails, contact items, calendar items, full mailboxes. Phenomenal stuff there. A lot of folks that are announcing things in this space are far more limited, but that also includes SharePoint and OneDrive documents as well, including all the versions of SharePoint documents. So really cool stuff here, and infinite retention, nothing to manage. You just recover what you need if you ever need to. And we also have a point product called Boomerang. This is a secondary product in the company that really is a technology that handles VMware environments only, and is a point solution to do migration, as well as failover and very simple, elegant failback to and from AWS or Azure. So if you're talking about virtual environments, this is a really cool purpose-built product that can handle that. Obviously, the core parts of the company and the portfolio really revolve around the Recovery Series and Unitrends Enterprise Backup with the Office 365 adder. Recently just got awarded the highest rating you can get with DCIG for our integrated backup appliances, as well as the hybrid cloud backup appliances. So that's something where Unitrends has dominated in the last couple of years and bodes really well for the Recovery Series. And if you look at reports like this, you can see that there are some newer appliance vendors kind of creeping into these, and these reports will kind of show you that they're pretty basic in comparison to their capabilities with Unitrends. And Unitrends is not the type of company that's gouging people for good enterprise-level capabilities. Our TCO and affordability is usually, bar none, given the amount of functionality we bring. And lastly, wouldn't be able to end the webinar without talking about some cool promotions and things that are out there for you. So for a limited time, anyone that purchases a new Recovery Series appliance automatically gets upgraded to the next biggest appliance. So any way you look at it, you can say you're getting more capacity for free, or you can say you're getting a discount that's equivalent to whatever the lower appliance is. Depending on which way you want to look at it, it's kind of up to you, but in the end, you can save up to over $64K in a single appliance purchase, and that's something that's available through December 30th. So, definitely if you're in the market right now looking to protect your hyperconverged or converged platform, and you want to kind of continue with the benefits that you're getting from those platforms within the all-in-one enterprise backup and continuity approach that we have, now's a great time because we're always obviously doing some really good deals here at the end of the year. All right, so Kevin, do we have any questions?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Great presentation. So we'll just jump in here. And just a reminder that supersized promo, if you want more information, if you go to the Unitrends homepage, there's a link right on the homepage so you can get more information about that. All right. So if you have any questions, please type them into the player itself, and we'll get started with the questions that we have. Question number 1. For Nutanix, can Unitrends protect both VMware and Acropolis using a single install?
So the answer is yes. We actually do have a customer that has a mix of VMware and Acropolis within their Nutanix environment, and they have one instance of our product. So we have agents deployed into the Acropolis side of things, protecting those machines, and we tap into the hypervisor APIs for VMware on the other side. And again, all centrally managed, one UI, one install.
Excellent. Okay, question number 2. Can Unitrends leverage Nutanix as a failover option for physical servers?
Yeah, so Nutanix seems to be the popular one here today. Yes, so we have capabilities to basically do automated failover as well as all those cool recovery assurance capabilities that we talked about before. So we can take physical Windows operating systems and fail those over into VMware or Hyper-V environments. And if those happen to be on Nutanix or any of the other converged or hyper-converged vendors we talked about, that all works just fine.
Okay. Next question is, can I fail over mixed types of server hardware in the Unitrends Cloud? For example, if I have Dell physical servers and Nutanix VMs, can they both fail over into your cloud and still properly network to each other?
Good. So it sounds like somebody picked up on the whole mixed infrastructure piece, which is nice. Obviously, that's one of the big benefits. So the answer is yes. I mean, our Unitrends Cloud infrastructure doesn't care what you have locally. So all we care about is that obviously we support the specific operating systems or virtual environments that we're protecting within our environment. We don't care about the actual hardware underlying infrastructure. So you could have Dell servers running VMware, Nutanix running Hyper-V, and SimpliVity, or well, SimpliVity is a bad example because they're virtual only, but Cisco UCS running, physical Windows, and those can basically all be failed over and work just fine within the Unitrends Cloud as a part of our DR as a service.
All right, looks like that's about all the questions that we have that have come in from the audience. So just as a reminder, this webinar was recorded, and you'll receive an email within a day or so with a link to the on-demand version of the webinar with some additional resources as well. And we will also be picking the $100 Amazon gift card winner, and you'll be notified via email. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we look forward to having you on future webinars. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.